The blizzard rolled across the Wyoming frontier like a living beast howling, tearing at the world, swallowing the last hints of daylight. Calder Holt leaned forward in the saddle, his heavy coat stiff with frost, his beard collecting snowflakes that melted against his breath. He had known winters, long and cruel ones, but this storm felt different. It felt hungry. "Easy, boy," he murmured to his horse, patting its neck. Just a little farther to the ridge. The wind screamed as if answering him. Calder was a man used to silence. After years of ranching alone in the mountains, he found comfort in the stillness, the solitude. No one depended on him, no one waited for him. No voices haunted the cabin but his own. He liked it that way, or so he'd told himself for years. But that night, fate had other plans. As he guided his horse around a bend in the narrow trail, something dark caught his aja shape half buried in the snow, small and still. For a moment he thought it might be a deer fallen in the storm, but then a pale hand emerged, limp and unmoving. Calder's heart kicked hard. Whoa, whoa! He pulled the reins, jumped down, and ran through the drifting snow. It was a woman, young though life had clearly been unkind to her. Her dress, torn at the seams, was frozen stiff. Her boots were thin, soaked through. Her hair dark, tangled, coated in frost was stuck to her face. She lay curled like someone trying to make themselves disappear. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Calder knelt beside her. She didn't respond, just breathed in shallow, fragile shudders. A satchel lay near her, half buried. Calder grabbed it with one hand while he lifted her with the other. She was so light it startled him, light in a way that spoke not of grace but starvation, suffering, survival. He wrapped her in his coat, pressing her against his chest, trying to give her whatever warmth he could. "Stay with me," he whispered, though she was barely conscious. "Don't you quit on me. Not out here." The storm pushed against him, but he forced his way to the horse. With effort, he hoisted her onto the saddle, climbed behind her, and held her upright as they pushed through the storm toward his cabin. The ride felt endless. Once, her head slumped back against his shoulder, and he felt her breath falter. His grip tightened. "You're not dying tonight," he said through clenched teeth. "Not on my land." When at last his cabin came into view, a dim glow behind the curtain of snow, Calder felt a surge of relief. He rode straight to the door, lifted her again, and carried her inside. Warmth enveloped them instantly. The fire he'd banked earlier still glowed. Sparks drifted as he added more logs. He laid her gently on his bed. Her skin was ice cold. Her lips nearly blue. Frost glimmered along the edge of her eyelashes. And yet she was beautiful in a way that spoke of resilience rather than fragility. A woman who had fought to survive long before the storm found her. "What happened to you?" Calder whispered, brushing snow from her hair. She breathed, but just barely. He heated water, warmed blankets, wrapped her carefully. He rubbed her hands, her arms, her back, doing whatever he could to coax life back into her. At last, she stirred. Her eyelids trembled. A faint broken sound escaped her. Calder leaned closer. "Easy," he whispered. "You're safe now." But even half-conscious, her expression held fear so deep it felt like a scar. Whoever she was, the storm wasn't the only thing she was running from. The storm raged well into the night, but inside Calder Holt's cabin, the world grew quiet, so quiet he could hear the crackle of every burning log, the slow, uneven breaths of the stranger he had rescued, and his own heartbeat, heavier than it had been in years. She slept fitfully, her body fighting its way back from the edge of winter's grip. More than once, Calder had to sit beside her and coax warmth into her fingertips. He didn't touch her, more than necessary. Something about the tension in her face warned him that touch, for her, meant fear. He saw it in the small tremors in her eyelids, in the way her shoulders tensed even in sleep. Someone had hurt this woman, long before the snow tried to finish the job. By dawn, the storm had weakened to a quiet hush. The light creeping through the frosted window cast soft gold across the room. Calder brewed strong coffee, the scent filling the cabin, earthy and warm. He checked the fire, adjusted the blankets around her, and opened her satchel not to invade her privacy, but to find anything that might help her. Inside, he found only 3 things. A small loaf of stale bread, wrapped in cloth, a tiny bottle of salve, nearly empty, and a folded letter sealed with wax, the seal broken. He did not open the letter. Instead, he set the satchel aside and turned back to her as she shifted under the covers. At last, her eyes opened, dark, wide, frightened. She stared at the ceiling first, then at the room, then at him, and the fear in her gaze sharpened. Calder raised both hands a little, palms out. "You're safe. You're in my cabin. Found you in the snow last night." She tried to sit, but her arms trembled under her. He stepped forward, but she flinched so violently he froze in place. "Easy," he said softly, voice low, gentle. "I ain't gonna touch you unless you ask." Her breathing hitched, uneven and panicked. "You were near frozen," he continued. "I brought you here, kept the fire going. That's all." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Instead, her eyes filled with tears. She blinked away quickly, as if she'd been taught not to cry where someone could see. Calder stepped back, giving her space. "You want water?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded faintly. He poured water from the kettle into a tin cup and set it on the table beside her instead of handing it to her. When she reached for it, her fingers shook so badly she had to use both hands. She sipped slowly, watching him as though he were a wild animal waiting to pounce. She didn't thank him, didn't ask questions, just held the cup as if grounding herself. "What's your name?" Calder asked softly. She swallowed hard. "Elara, that's a strong name." He paused. "Mine's Calder Holt." She nodded, but her gaze drifted toward the window as if expecting someone dangerous to burst through the door at any moment. "You got nothing to fear here," Calder said quietly. Her lips trembled. She shook her head, almost violently, and whispered something so soft he barely heard it. "Please take it easy. I have not been loved in years." The words were not flirtation, not softness. They were broken, raw, truth confession rather than comfort. Calder felt something in him shift. Not pity, not shock, recognition. A man who'd lived alone long enough understood what it meant to be starved of gentleness. "You're safe," he repeated, his voice firm but warm. "You can rest. Nobody's gonna hurt you here." And for the first time, her shoulders eased just barely. Not trust, but the smallest beginning of it. The fifth morning dawned warm inside the cabin, though outside the world remained a frozen canvas of white and quiet. Elara had begun moving around more carefully, like a fawn learning the shape of its own legs, but she still startled easily, still apologized for taking up space, still braced herself when noise broke the stillness. Calder noticed it all. He never said anything, but his every movement became deliberate boots, softer on the floorboards, voice lower, gestures slower. A man like him didn't know how to heal wounds made by other men, but he knew how not to make them worse. That morning, Elara insisted on helping with breakfast. "I can cook," she said softly, twisting her fingers in the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "I want to do something." "You ain't gotta earn your keep," Calder said. "You just rest." She swallowed, gaze dropping. "I can't only take it feels wrong." There was so much truth and pain layered in those words that Calder didn't argue further. He simply stepped aside and let her. Elara moved around the small kitchen area with slow, careful steps, familiar yet timid gestures. When she reached for a bowl on the top shelf, she stretched too far, and the bowl slipped. It hit the floor and shattered. Her entire body jolted. Fear surged through her, so violently she froze, eyes widening, breath quickening. The color drained from her face. She backed into the counter as if expecting a strike, a shout, a punishment. Calder saw it all in a heartbeat. He didn't move quickly, not one sharp motion. Instead, he crouched slowly, lowering himself to gather the pieces. His voice remained steady, almost casual. "It's just a bowl." Her breath shook. I'm sorry. I didn't mean Elara." His tone was gentle but firm as he glanced up. "Look at me." She hesitated, then met his eyes. "I ain't angry," he said, his voice soft as worn leather. "Things break. That's life." She stared as if trying to make sense of his reaction, as if she had only ever known one kind of response to mistakes and this was not it. Calder reached for a larger shard of ceramic, but his hand brushed against hers, a simple, accidental touch. Elara stiffened instantly. But then something strange happened. Instead of flinching away, she remained still. Her breath caught, but not with fear. With confusion, with yearning. It was the first touch in a very long time that didn't come with pain. Calder froze too, sensing the shift. His fingers remained lightly against hers, not grabbing, not holding, just touching. "You're safe," he said quietly. "You don't have to be scared of me." Her lower lip trembled. I don't understand how to not be." "That's all right," Calder murmured. "You don't gotta know everything today." Slowly, gently, he moved his hand away so she wouldn't feel trapped. But Elara's gaze followed the movement, almost as if she wanted to hold on to the warmth a little longer. After cleaning the mess, he stood and reached out to her slow, open-handed, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Instead, she let him help her to her feet. Her hand trembled in his, but she held on. "You ain't gotta fear my hands," he said softly. "Not ever." Elara turned her face away, overwhelmed by the tenderness she didn't know how to accept. "It feels strange," she whispered, being touched without hurting. She didn't. Calder swallowed hard. "Then we'll take things slow. As slow as you need." A sound escaped her, half sob, half relief, and something unfurled inside her, fragile as new spring grass pushing through snow. Trust, not full, not complete, but the beginning of it. That evening, as the fire warmed the room and the world outside faded to dusk, Elara sat at the edge of the bed, touching her fingertips together, feeling, remembering, and Calder sitting across the room polishing his saddle stole a glance at her. She didn't flinch, she didn't shrink, she simply existed in the same space as him without fear. The first real softness between them had been born not from desire, but from safety. And safety, for Elara, was the closest thing to love she had ever known. The cabin grew warmer as the days passed, not from the fire alone, but from the subtle, shifting air between two wounded souls, learning to breathe in the same space. Elara began moving with a little more ease, though her steps still held caution, as if the ground could collapse beneath her at any moment. Calder noticed the tiny changes, the way she no longer flinched when he walked past, though she still watched him from the corner of her eye. The way her voice carried the faintest thread of steadiness when she spoke. The way she sat nearer the fire instead of curling herself into the shadows. One evening, after supper, the snow outside glowed blue under the rising moon. Calder sat at the small table polishing his rifle. Alara sat nearby, mending a tear in one of his shirts. She had insisted on it, claiming it gave her something useful to do. Calder didn't argue. The quiet companionship was something he had forgotten he could enjoy. After a long stretch of silence, Alara spoke. "Did you ever love someone? Before all this, before living alone?" Calder paused, fingers stilling on the rifle. He didn't look up. "I did." Alara's hand hesitated above her needle. She waited. He took a slow breath. "Her name was Mara. We were young, childhood sweethearts. Planned to marry come spring." A shadow passed over his features. "She took sick that winter. Fever couldn't shake it." Alara set the shirt down, her gaze soft. "I'm sorry." Calder nodded once. "Hard. I buried her under the willow tree out front." Silence wrapped around them, thick but gentle. Alara didn't speak again for a long moment. When she finally did, her voice was barely above a breath. "I've never loved anyone," she confessed. "Not truly. Not safely." Calder looked at her, then quiet, steady. "You're allowed to have that, Alara." She shook her head. "I wouldn't know how. I don't even know how to be wanted without pain attached." "You ain't gotta know everything at once," Calder said. His tone was warm, heavy with sincerity. "Love ain't something you owe. And it damn sure ain't supposed to hurt." Her throat tightened at that. She looked away, blinking rapidly. "My husband always said it was my fault." He was angry. That if I spoke softer, moved quieter, smiled more, maybe he wouldn't have to teach me lessons. Calder's jaw clenched. "He didn't teach you lessons. He broke you down so you'd think you deserved it." Her breath hitched. "I did think that." "You don't anymore," Calder said gently. She glanced up, and for the first time, she didn't look away immediately. Their eyes held, and in that exchange, between her fractured courage and his steadfast warmth, something unspoken passed. Not romance, not lust, something deeper. A recognition of another soul who had endured too much alone. Calder set the rifle aside and sat back. "You're safe now, and safety comes first. Not love, not expectations, just breathing without fear." Alara closed her eyes as a tear slipped down her cheek. "I haven't breathed in years." Calder rose slowly, deliberately, and crossed the small room. He stopped a few feet awake, close enough to offer comfort, far enough not to overwhelm her. "Alara," he said softly, "I don't want anything from you. Not a promise, not a debt, not love, before you're ready." She opened her eyes. "But I want you to know something," he continued. "Not all men take, some give, some stay gentle, even when the world is cruel." Her fingers trembled. "I want to believe that." "You will," Calder said. "And I'll be right here while you learn." He didn't touch her. He didn't lean closer. He simply offered the warmth of his presence. And that was the first night she didn't sleep, curled up tight in fear. Instead, she lay on her side, watching the fire glow softly in the hearth, knowing someone nearby cared enough to wait for her wounds to heal at their own quiet pace. A love without demands. A love without pain. A love she had never been allowed to imagine. Alara slept most of the morning, her exhausted body finally surrendering to rest. When she did wake, she ate little half a slice of bread, a few sips of broth. Calder didn't press her. He moved quietly around the cabin, tending to chores with the deliberate softness of a man who'd learned how to respect silence. He wasn't used to sharing his space, but her presence felt strangely right, like something that had been missing without him noticing. When the sun dipped behind the pines, Alara finally spoke again. "Why did you help me?" Her voice was thin, almost brittle. Calder glanced up from the fire he was stoking. "Because leaving you out there wasn't an option." She watched him, unsure if she believed him. "Most men wouldn't have bothered." Calder shrugged, poking the embers gently. "Most men ain't me." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't as sharp as before. She sat wrapped in a thick blanket on the bed, her knees drawn up as if she needed to protect herself from everything, even the air. Calder turned to face her fully. "Alara, what happened? You were near dead out there. You running from something." Her fingers tightened around the blanket. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Her eyes flicked to the door, then to her satchel, then back to her lap. She inhaled shakily. "I didn't mean to trouble anyone," she whispered. "I just wanted to get far enough away before he found me." Calder's jaw tightened. She swallowed hard, her throat working. "My husband." The word fell heavy. It didn't sound like a title given willingly, more like a chain. Calder didn't move closer, but his gaze sharpened. "Is he the reason you were out in that storm?" Alara nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks silently. She brushed them away fast, embarrassed, but more tears followed. She seemed almost surprised by them, as if she wasn't used to having the freedom to cry. "He wasn't always cruel," she said softly. "Or maybe he was, and I was too young to understand it. My father married me off to him for land. I never got a say." Her voice broke, He gambled everything, drank everything, and when he lost money, he blamed me. Calder clenched his hands into fists against his thighs, forcing himself to stay still. She didn't need anger, she needed space. Did he hurt you? He asked gently. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she pulled the blanket aside, just enough to reveal faint, yellowing bruises near her collarbone. Older scars, pale and thin, lined her upper arm, marks made by someone who had not been careful with her. Someone who had treated her like a possession, not a woman. Calder's chest tightened. A cold fury simmered beneath his ribs, but he kept his voice steady. He didn't deserve any of that. Ilara looked away. He said I did. Said I talked too much, looked too sad. Didn't smile enough, didn't obey. That ain't love, Calder said, his voice low but certain. That's cruelty dressed up like ownership. Her breath stuttered. He said he'd sell me. Trade me to settle a debt. I heard him talking to a man outside our house. I ran before he woke up. Her hands shook as she spoke. I didn't know where to go. Just walked. Then the storm came. Calder closed his eyes briefly, grounding himself. When he opened them, he met her gaze steadily. You did the right thing running. No shame in wanting to live. Her lips parted, trembling. I didn't think anyone would save me. I didn't save you, Calder said softly. I just gave you a place to land. For the first time since he'd found her, something shifted in her expression. Not joy, not trust, but a small crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. And through that crack, a single fragile truth slipped out, so faint he barely heard it. I don't know how to be safe. Calder nodded, eyes warm and steady. That's all right. I'll teach you. The next few days unfolded slowly, like dawn creeping across a long winter night. Calder Holt had always kept to himself. His ranch was a quiet corner of the world, tucked between tall pines and wide fields. But with Ilara in his cabin, everything felt different. Not uncomfortable, just new. Each morning he rose early, careful not to wake her, and stoked the fire until the cabin felt safe and warm again. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the land blanketed in white. The air carried that crisp stillness that only came after heavy snow, fall silent, pure, expectant. Ilara woke later each day, but when she did, her body still held tension like a bowstring. She apologized for everything, for sleeping too long, for drinking too much water, for being in his way. Calder corrected none of her actions, only her thinking. You ain't in the way, he told her gently the first time. If you were, I'd say so. She didn't believe him then. Not yet, but a seed had been planted. As she grew stronger, Calder started showing her parts of ranch life, not because he needed help, but because he could see how much she needed purpose, something to anchor her shattered sense of self. Come outside with me for a minute, he said one morning, offering her his coat to wrap around her shoulders, just to breathe fresh air. She hesitated but followed. When she stepped out into the sunlight, she blinked in surprise. The world looked untouched, a sea of snow, sparkling under the rising sun, the sky clear and blue, smoke drifting from the chimney. The quiet was deep, comforting, the kind that asked nothing from her. It's beautiful, she whispered. Calder nodded from beside her. Always is, after a bad storm. They stood there for a while without speaking, and for the first time, she didn't seem afraid of the silence. He started teaching her simple things first. How to fill the water pail. How to add logs to the fire without choking the flames. How to check the cold stores in the root cellar. She approached each task uncertainly, as if expecting to be scolded. Her eyes darted to him often, searching his face for disappointment. But Calder never raised his voice, never rushed her hands, never criticized. You're doing fine, he would say, steady and patient. And each time, she breathed a little easier. One afternoon, he invited her to the barn. The horses whickered softly when they saw him, a sound that always softened his features. Ilara stiffened, but followed, clutching the coat tight around her. You ever been around horses? He asked. She shook her head. He never allowed it. Calder's jaw tightened, but he didn't comment. Instead, he led his gentlest mare toward her. This here is Willow. She won't hurt you. The horse lowered her head, nudging Ilara's hand. Ilara startled, then slowly reached out. When her fingers brushed the mare's warm nose, her expression broke into something soft and stunned, a look Calder had never seen on her before. She's warm, Ilara whispered. He chuckled, low and warm. She likes you. Ilara's eyes shimmered. She didn't. She seemed afraid, too, but something inside her shifted. She wasn't used to gentle things. Not even animals, not even people. That night, while Calder chopped wood outside, Ilara watched from the window. The steady, powerful rhythm of his movements mesmerized her controlled strength. Not wild or threatening. A man who could break things but chose not to. A man who moved around her with patient softness she didn't understand. When he carried the pieces inside and stacked them near the fireplace, she whispered, almost to herself, "You're kind." Calder paused, meeting her eyes for a long moment. Not kind, just human. No, she said quietly, not everyone is. Her voice trembled not with fear, but with realization. In a harsh world, she had finally found someone gentle. Someone who treated her like she mattered. Someone who made her believe just a little that safety might not be a dream. For weeks, life had settled into a fragile rhythm. Calder and Alara moved through the days carefully, the ranch slowly returning to its familiar hum. The horses, the chickens, the wind through the pines, they all seemed to welcome her presence, as if sensing the change she had begun to make in the cabin. Alara, once fragile and frightened, had begun to breathe without constant fear, though shadows of her past lingered in every cautious glance, every quiet hesitation. But the past has a way of catching up, especially in the Wild West. It started with the faint sound of hooves echoing through the valley. Calder had learned to recognize the subtle signs. The hoofbeats uneven, urgent, deliberate. He froze in the doorway of the barn, scanning the horizon through the snow-covered fields. A figure emerged from the trees, followed by others, mounted and armed, men who didn't belong in this quiet corner of the world. Alara, he called, his voice calm but low, carrying the weight of warning. Stay inside. Do not come near the door. Her heart clenched. She had sensed it too, the feeling of being hunted, but had hoped it was only a nightmare, a ghost from her dreams. Now it was real. Her stomach dropped, and she backed away from the window, gripping the edge of the table like a lifeline. They found me, she whispered, voice trembling. He said he would sell me. Calder's hands tightened into fists, but he didn't rush. He knew anger could be as dangerous as bullets. He moved to the window, gauging the distance, reading the men's movements. They were looking for her, and they would not hesitate to take her, no matter the cost. One of the riders waved, a cruel smile flashing beneath the brim of his hat. Stay low, Calder instructed. I'll handle them. Alara shook her head, panic flooding her voice. No, you can't fight for me. I need you safe. I'm not worth it. You are worth it, Calder said firmly. To me, you are worth everything. And no one threatens what I care about. Her eyes filled with tears, fear twisting her chest. But she knew she could not leave him. Not now. The world outside could be cruel, but inside the cabin, she had begun to learn that some rare men fought for what mattered without demanding anything in return. Calder readied his rifle, checked the chamber, and stepped outside. The cold bit into his face, the wind snapping at his coat, but he moved like a shadow among the trees, careful and precise. The men stopped in the clearing, confused at the sudden silence that replaced the wind. Calder's presence was a force they hadn't expected, and for a moment their confidence faltered. Alara watched from the window, heart hammering. Her breath fogged the glass as she whispered prayers she had not spoken in years. Each sound, the snap of a branch, the whinny of a horse, made her jump, but she stayed still, trusting Calder, trusting someone for the first time in her life. Shots rang out quick, calculated, precise. Calder moved like a man who had known loss and learned the weight of justice. The riders faltered. Fear replaced their cruelty as they realized they had underestimated the man who had chosen to protect rather than abandon. By the time the snow settled again, Calder stood at the edge of the clearing, bruised but resolute. The riders had fled, leaving behind only the echo of their threat. He turned back toward the cabin, each step measured, and when Elar rushed to him, she collapsed into his arms, trembling, crying, relief flooding her entire body. You're safe, he murmured, pressing her against his chest. No one will touch you while I'm here. And for the first time in years, Alara believed it, not just the words, but the truth behind them. He had faced the danger that haunted her, not because he had to, but because he chose to, because he cared. She clung to him, no longer afraid of his hands, no longer bracing for punishment. She had been hunted, and she had been protected. She had feared losing, and she had found safety. And in that moment, she realized that love could exist even after terror. That trust could be earned, even after years of cruelty. And in the quiet aftermath, with snow falling gently around the cabin, she knew this man would be her anchor, her protector, her heart's first safe place in a lifetime. The morning after the attack, the air around Calder's cabin felt tense but alive. Snow still lay thick on the ground, each footprint visible in the cold light of dawn. Calder moved with quiet purpose, assessing damage and tending to the horses. Alara watched him from the doorway, her fingers gripping the frame as though holding herself upright depended on it. For the first time, she realized she no longer feared him only, the world outside. And even then, with Calder at her side, she felt something she had never experienced, the fragile thread of courage. They'll be back, she said softly, her voice barely above the wind. Calder didn't flinch. He met her gaze steadily. If they come, we'll be ready. You need to stay inside. No wandering. I don't want you hurt, she admitted, her lips trembling. You're worth it, he said simply. I'll face whatever's out there for you. Not because you're mine, but because I choose to protect you. Because I care. Her chest tightened. She had never heard a man speak with such conviction without expecting something in return. There was no ownership in his words. No threat, only the unwavering promise of safety. Throughout the day, Calder prepared the cabin for the possibility of another attack. He reinforced the doors, checked the rifles, and ensured that Alara knew where to hide if needed. She followed his instructions, not because she was afraid of him, but because she trusted him. And that trust, fragile as it was, had begun to root itself in her heart. As dusk fell, the horizon remained silent. Snow drifted lazily from the sky, and the forest beyond the cabin looked peaceful, but both knew it could be shattered at any moment. Calder finally set down his rifle and approached her, careful to move slowly so as not to startle her. "Alara," he said, "come sit with me by the fire. We'll take a breath." Together, she hesitated, then obeyed, moving closer than she had in weeks. She perched on the edge of the chair, knees drawn up, while Calder took the floor in front of the hearth. They sat in companionable silence, watching the flames dance, each crackle echoing in the small cabin. "You don't have to be afraid of being cared for," Calder said quietly. "You don't have to apologize for needing warmth. You've survived too long without it, and I won't let you suffer alone anymore." Alara swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "Being safe, being wanted. You'll learn," he said gently, slowly. "One day at a time, and I'll be right here. Always steady, always patient." For a long moment, she studied him, as if measuring whether his words were real. Then, in a quiet gesture that startled even herself, she reached forward and touched his hand tentatively, barely brushing the skin. Calder didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned slightly closer, letting her feel the warmth of his presence. It wasn't a declaration of love, not yet. It was trust. It was surrender without fear, and for Alara, it was revolutionary. "You're different from anyone I've ever known," she whispered. "And you're different from anyone I've ever met," he replied. "Not fragile, not broken, just learning to live again." The fire crackled between them, casting soft light on their faces. Outside, the wind had calmed, but the forest still held secrets. Yet, inside the cabin, something new had taken root. Love without possession, protection without control, and the fragile, powerful belief that two wounded hearts could heal together. Alara leaned slightly against Calder, and he rested his hand over hers. No words were needed. No promises beyond the moment. They had survived fear and cruelty. They had survived the storm, and together, they had begun to discover that love could exist, not as a chain, but as a sanctuary. For the first time in years, Alara felt the safety of someone standing for her not against her will, but beside her choice, and in that quiet warmth, with snow still drifting outside, they both understood something undeniable. Protection is the first step to trust, and trust is the foundation of a love that can finally grow free of pain. The first light of spring seeped through the cabin windows, soft and golden, illuminating the small, cozy space in a way that made everything seem fragile yet full of promise. The snow had finally melted into rivulets, running down the slopes, and the land outside shimmered with new life. Calder had already been up, tending the horses and preparing breakfast, the rhythmic movements of his work a grounding presence in her world. Alara watched him quietly, seated by the fire, the sunlight catching strands of her dark hair. She no longer flinched at his movements. She no longer braced herself for a hand raised in anger or a voice raised in frustration. This was new territory for her, a life built not on fear, but on trust. And as she observed him, her heart, still tender from years of cruelty, began to feel the first cautious stirrings of something she had allowed herself to feel in a long time. "Hope, you're up early," she said softly, her voice breaking the morning quiet. Calder turned and smiled, warm and easy. "Couldn't let the horses starve, and I reckon you could use some fresh air before breakfast." She nodded, realizing that his presence in her life had become as natural as the sunlight that now warmed her shoulders. She rose, moving carefully but without hesitation, and joined him outside. The chill of the morning wind was sharp, but for the first time, it didn't feel threatening. It felt invigorating, alive. As they worked side by side, feeding the animals and checking the fences, Calder taught her the routines of the ranch with patience. Every step, every small task, became a lesson in trust. Alara learned to wield tools without fear, to ride a horse without trembling, to care for herself and the animals alike. Calder guided her gently, never forcing, never scolding, always allowing her to grow at her own pace. By midday, they sat together on the porch, eating a simple meal of bread, cheese, and fresh eggs. The silence between them was comfortable, filled not with tension, but with mutual understanding. Alara dared to reach for Calder's hand, resting hers lightly atop his. The gesture was small, tentative, but it carried enormous weight, the unspoken acknowledgement of trust, of safety, of the slow awakening of love. "You've taught me something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that I didn't think I could ever learn again. How to be safe, how to be cared for without fear." Calder's thumb brushed over the back of her hand, slow and deliberate. "And you've taught me, too," he replied, "that patience and gentle love can heal even the deepest wounds. That sometimes saving someone doesn't mean fighting the world, it means being the calm in their storm." Tears pricked her eyes, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being understood. She leaned against him lightly, their shoulders touching. For the first time, she allowed herself to relax fully, to exhale years of tension that had built within her. Calder's steady presence anchored her, the warmth of his body a promise that she could exist in this world without fear. The day stretched lazily into evening. The sky blazed with golds and pinks, and the cabin seemed to glow from within. Alara and Calder tended the fire, moved the animals into the barn, and finally sat together as night fell. No words were needed. They had already communicated the deepest truths through gestures, glances, and the simple act of staying near one another. In that quiet, golden light, Alara realized that she was no longer a woman running from her past. She was no longer someone broken and afraid. She was learning to love herself again and, perhaps, to allow someone else to love her in return. Calder's patience, gentleness, and unwavering presence had created a sanctuary for her heart, a place where love could grow slowly, safely, and without pain. As they watched the stars emerge above the darkened valley, Alara whispered softly, "I want to learn love." Slowly, but fully. Calder tightened his hand around hers, a silent vow, "And I'll be here for every step of the way." For the first time in years, they felt a peace neither had thought possible. In the light of a new dawn, with the world outside still vast and untamed, two hearts began to heal together, ready to face whatever life might bring, side by side. Spring had fully arrived at Calderholt's ranch. The snow was gone, replaced by the fresh green of early grass and wildflowers beginning to bloom along the hillsides. The cabin, once a refuge from storms, both literal and emotional, now felt alive with warmth and the promise of a life built together. Calder had been working outside since sunrise, repairing fences and tending the barn, while Alara moved with him, carrying baskets of feed and tools, her hands no longer trembling from fear. For the first time in years, Alara felt capable, strong, and safe. She had learned not only to care for the ranch but also to care for herself. Calder's steady guidance, patience, and quiet reassurance had taught her that love didn't have to hurt, that protection could be gentle, and that trust could grow slowly, even after years of cruelty. That afternoon, after the chores were done, Calder led her to the edge of the property, near the small creek that wound through the valley. The water was clear and fast-moving, glinting in the sunlight, and birds sang among the budding trees. Calder paused, taking her hands in his. "Alara," he said softly, his voice steady, "you don't have to be afraid anymore. You don't have to hide from anyone, or anything." Her eyes shimmered with tears, not of sorrow, but of gratitude and hope. I never thought I'd feel safe again," she whispered. "I never thought someone could care without demanding, without hurting." Calder brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I care," he said simply, "and I choose to be gentle, because that's how love works. Not fear, not possession, just giving. Patiently, every day." Alara's lips trembled, and for a moment, she simply allowed herself to lean into him, feeling his strength without the terror she had once carried. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a touch that spoke of unwavering support, of quiet devotion. For the first time, she believed in the possibility of a love that could grow soft and strong without fear. Together, they returned to the cabin, where she began a small ritual she had never dared before. She planted a rosebush just outside the front window, choosing a spot that would receive the morning sun. The bush was young and fragile, but with care, it would grow and bloom. It became a symbol not just of the new life they were building, but of her own rebirth. Calder knelt beside her, helping to pack the soil around the roots, careful not to rush her hands or movements. "Just like this bush," he said gently, "love takes time. Water it with patience, and it'll flourish." Alara smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I want to grow with it," she said softly. Calder took her hand, and together they finished the planting, the sunlight warming their backs. They stood side by side, looking at the tender green shoots, and a quiet understanding passed between them. No dramatic declarations were needed, no rush. They had survived storms, cruelty, and fear. Now, they had each other. As evening approached, the cabin glowed in the golden light of sunset. Calder held Alara close as they watched the sky deepen to orange and purple, the mountains standing silent and strong in the distance. "No one rushes your heart," he whispered. "Not while I breathe, not while I'm here." Alara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, feeling the solid reality of a life that no longer demanded she run or hide. "I trust you," she whispered. "And I'll spend every day earning that trust," Calder replied. The stars began to appear, one by one, in the vast western sky. The ranch was quiet, except for the gentle hum of nature, the whisper of the wind through the pines, and the soft warmth between them. They had found safety, trust, and love, not the fiery, reckless kind that demands, but the enduring kind that heals, strengthens, and allows two hearts to grow together. In the cabin, the fire burned low. The rosebush outside began its quiet life, and two souls once broken, battered, and afraid stood, ready to face the future. Together, Alara finally understood. Love could be gentle, patient, and real. And in that understanding, she found freedom. hope, and the courage to embrace a life worth living hand in hand with the man who had shown her that love could be both soft and strong.